Thank you, everyone, for this is a first of our public board meetings on the budget for 2024-2025 school year. And we'll do a little bit of look back and look ahead and a few things like that. And as you know, our funding announcement doesn't come till the middle of March. So this is all preparatory thinking and musing on our part. First off, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on the territory of the Tsawwassen and Qualicum First Nations, and I thank them for allowing us to live, work, and play on their traditional lands. So, Mr. Amos, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Flynn. Hopefully you can all hear me okay.
Oh, and do you want to go over how you want to do questions? Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, so the chair, if she can take the questions.
Yep.
at any given point, don't hesitate to interrupt. I will share my screen, so I won't be able to see as many faces, but certainly through the chair, she can handle any questions that might come up, and absolutely feel free to interrupt as we go along.
Great.
Okay, without further ado, and the obvious answer to this question is yes, we will share this out at the end. It'll be up on the website along with the actual YouTube, or not YouTube, but anyways, along with the recording kind of thing. Okay, so kicking us off, I'm just going to share, and I'm going to do it so that it's less cumbersome for me to handle. So you're going to see I'm not putting it in full slide view, because it's just easier to handle it when it's done this way. So folks can see.
Yep.
Someone to admit. Okay. Right. So tonight, again, yeah, so as Chair Flynn indicated, we're going to go through some of the budget process itself. We're going to talk about some of the historical information. I'll share that out from the financial and enrollment data. We'll talk about some of the budget planning considerations that are kind of coming to the fore. Ministry priorities. I've got a couple of slides on what we're doing to address some of the ministry priorities with the funding that they support some of their initiatives. Likewise, we'll talk about a little bit on the capital planning side, some of the considerations that go into the operating fund table, as well as obviously the capital funding cycle. And then I'll share out some of the early survey results that we've got based on the survey that's on the website. So get my cursor. Sheesh. So budget process. So this is kind of a slide that kind of indicates where we are in the budget cycle. So again, we're starting right now in the top right-hand corner, January through March. And so last month we closed out the amended budget. So in January through March, we're kind of running two parallel budget streams, as it were. So we're able to kind of close out the amended budget for the 22-23 year, and then start up the conversations on the annual budget for 23-24. So again, we talk about the information gathering, the survey going out. We will share some of that information on enrollment, projections going into this cycle. I talked for the first time about the inclusion of the multi-year planning, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in terms of how that's impacting the budget planning cycle. Likewise, we have these conversations with the partner in public, and just recognizing that we won't have the funding announcement until mid-March, but at least we can start sussing out some of the wonders that are going into the planning, and share the information, obviously, that we know up to this point. April and June, obviously, once we get the funding announcement in March, then we go off on spring break. We sort of look at the numbers, compare that to what we thought where we were going to get, and then we follow up with the partners and the public with further conversations around budget, recognizing that we'll at least be prepared if the board has the appetite to adopt the budget in April, but point being, they do not have to actually pass the budget and deliver it to the ministry until June 30th. Obviously, summer comes along. We obviously reset ourselves from the old year. We do our financial statements during that period, and then September, new kids come in. We adjust classroom staffing accordingly, and then once those at the end of September, the ministry has a provincial count. That feeds into how many kids we have in the district, which feeds our funding, so that by December, we'll have these grant recalculations, and then obviously make some further decisions on the amended budget so that it gets adopted by the following February. So that's the cycle, and again, it's just an annual thing. It keeps going, no different than the strategic planning session work that's happening, no different than any other of the planning cycles that we do within a K-12 education. So I always frame the conversation or start the conversation in terms of why we do this, why we make the inclusion of public, why we share this information. It's all about building a better budget. It's all about aligning our strategic plan and priorities. And again, have a look at the financial or the multi-year financial plan on our district. It kind of highlights how we fund some of these programs and how we tie some of these funds back to our strategic plan. We talk about what we need to do, transparency, openness, and accessibility. And again, this is a dialogue we're having right now in terms of holding public meetings and then sharing the information via documents and presentations on our website. Again, recognizing it's better budget. So the inclusiveness or being inclusive, having participation from these groups and having realistic debate so that we're being transparent and we're being realistic in terms of what we can do and what we can share, kind of thing. And again, it's all about the engagement of the stakeholders and recognizing what we can do with some of the funding. Again, comprehensive budget accounting comes into it. It's the alignment to the budget so that we can, when we do the audits or when we do the financial statements at the end of the year, there's clear lines of delineating this is what we intended to spend and this is how we spent it, kind of thing. And so part of the budget or part of the financial recap process looks at recognizing and giving explanation to the board in terms of why a certain budget might have been off because of plans and that kind of stuff. But again, it's holding the financial statements to account against the budget, what that was intended. Likewise, it ties into the conversation around performance evaluation and the value of money. Again, recognizing that the funding that we have is taxpayer funded, and therefore we need to be recognizing the fact that we have to deliver on these things. So again, it's a continuous review of programs and priorities, and then tying them back to what we thought would happen and what we would like to see happen. Again, we'll tease out some of the financial or the fiscal risks, and again, it's understanding the sustainability of some of the fundings and whether or not they are one-offs or multi-year, and whether or not we can continue to deliver on a certain service, recognizing the funds may not be there the following year. Quality, integrity, and independent audit. And again, that just ties back to the audit function that ties the financial statements back to the budget process. And then the capital budget framework kind of, we'll have a couple of slides in terms of how that impacts our conversation going forward on the budget. So, and again, so some of the things that are obviously on the radar. I mean, this is the second year that we'll do a multi-year financial planning, and again, it'll wrap up and go forward another 3 years. But again, recognizing that it's about aligning the financial resources with our strategic plan, our operational needs, and then the linking back to the educational outcomes that the superintendent speaks to regularly. Again, communicating the allocations of our financial resources over several years. And again, this is an element that we don't always share out, that we need to now, not need to now, but that we're kind of recognizing that we do need to share out the impact on some of the capital planning in terms of the short-term, medium-term need for resource replacement. I use the example of our copier replacement program. It's not something that you should be tapping into the budget every 5th year, but it's something that you can plan for, that if you can put some resources aside annually, then it's obviously minimizes the impact on the operating budget when that time is there. Same thing for our white fleet, that we were able to add some value to it in this year's budget. And the white fleet I talk about is the operations and maintenance vehicles. They're the vehicles that are not funded through ministry, yellow fleet buses, as it were. It's funded locally, and so we have to sort of have a plan on how we get to replacing those over the course of time. Other things on our radar, obviously, is the child care and food initiative programs the food initiative program was recently announced last year. The child care program has been, from a capital perspective, has been out there for about 7 years, 6 years, and now with the impact of childcare going into the Ministry of Education as Ministry of Education and Childcare, it makes it more of a priority, obviously, on the part of school districts to do and provide that service as best they can. The other thing that I can't really comment on too much, other than the fact that we need to be recognize that there will be a fall election, and it'll just be a question of what is the impact that it'll have on us, specifically for bargaining. We're finishing the last year of the 3-year collective bargaining process for teachers and support staff, and so teachers bargaining will start up in the fall of this year, and then support staff will be in the spring of next year. But point being, it will have obviously if it is a change of government or what have you, it will have an impact obviously on the collective bargaining process in terms of the provincial picture of what is it that they want to impart on the bargaining process. Likewise, in the funding priorities, and that just becomes a question of if there is a new government, will they commit to the same priorities that the current government has? Will they commit to it? Will they change it? Will they add some new values? So yeah, we're going to go kind of into some sharing of some information, some financial information, some enrollment data. The line graph, if you want, is our enrollment over the past 11 years. And then the bar graph represents our operating or our funding from the ministry. So you can see that the blue on the bar graph is the ministry operating grants, and red being the ministry other grants, and the green being the special purpose funds. Special purpose funds are funds that are given to us by the government for an express purpose. They come with a caveat, as it were. It's often these days it's basically how the ministry gets to some of their objectives when it comes to the delivering of some of their priorities. So case in point, the Feeding Futures Fund is embedded in the green. The Classroom Enhancement Fund that funds the Supreme Court class size and composition language that is supporting that. Embedded in there are some of the early learning programs, is Ready, Set, Learn, Strong Start, those sorts of things. French funding is in there. So one observation that I kind of make off of this one is the impact that obviously that green bar is getting bigger, and it's a good thing in one sense because the government is funding additional programs. The downside that I kind of allude to later on is that that even though it's adding funding to our domain, it doesn't necessarily always tie to what we would if the funding was unfettered, we might do something different with it, as it were. But we recognize that obviously it meets the objectives of the ministry, and we're happy to deliver on the service. But it's just one of those things that sometimes puts a strain on the system if we happen to want to spend it a different way. So my only commentary here is the ministry grants generally are reflecting the differential in our growth. You can see how our growth or our enrollment, as it were, declined up until 14-15. If you recall, going back in time a little bit, it was in 13-14 when the board was making those difficult decisions to close schools because of this enrollment decline that perpetuated for about 15 years prior, to a point where about 14-15 it was the lowest point, obviously, in the district enrollment. And then since that time, you can see that we've slowly got ourselves up to about the 4,400 range. And you'll see that again expressed a little bit differently, but point being the funding is kind of matching that increase with additional bumps based on the collective agreement in the past 3 years. And again, this is the bargaining funds coming into the district in the form of that red and blue section. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you can see the modest growth that I've indicated here since 2014 as we come back equals about a 9.4% increase, which is about 1% a year. And that kind of ties back to how we project our enrollment and whether or not we can sustain that increase over time, or is something else impacting how we decide what our enrollment is going to be projected at.
Ron?
Yep.
I think you said
Trustee
earlier
Cronin?
that that little blip in 2021 was a bit of an artifact.
Yeah, it's an outlier. And again, there's wonders in terms of why it's there. It's certainly that's the COVID year. So we picked up, and you'll see this again on a couple of other slides. We picked up quite a few kids in the DL program, and so again, it looks like a weird year because the question just becomes, were they internal kids, or did we pick up out of district kids? But again, it's recognized that if that was the high point, it came down a little bit. So somehow, some way, these kids have exited the system since that time. They might have graduated. Might have gone to other districts. But point being, it is a bit of an outlier. And typical of all of whenever we look at data, obviously, you're always going to see these weird anomalies. It doesn't change the trend, but you have to be careful in terms of how you interpret that trend.
Thank you.
Yeah, because in a perfect, like if you were projecting it, can you see my cursor when I do this?
Yep.
Yeah. So case in point, you can see, I mean, if this is the trend line here, and if you had projected based on the original trend line, you would have said, oh yeah, okay, we're bound to get to 5,000 in no time. Well, as it happens, I mean, you've kind of got to say, okay, that was one trend, and then then there became a new trend line at this point with a much smaller escalation kind of thing. And so this is kind of what we're bounded by right now, this kind of a trend line. And so again, you'll see that represented when we actually get to the projection discussion. All right, moving along. So these are so I've added these kind of from previous presentations, but what they're included in our survey questions to give people some conception in terms of how we spend our money and where the money comes from. So again, it's representing the 23-24 revenues, so the year we're in, as it were. So this is our amended budget revenues, about 66.9 million coming to us in the form of ministry grants via enrollment-based, unique student needs, unique geographic factors, that other ministry grants, that red bar that we saw earlier, international students, again, now these are additional fees over and above the ministry grants. Other revenues take the form of small grants coming from outside sources, third-party sources, rental properties, interest, investment revenues, and that kind of nature. And so that adds about 2%. And then now the special purpose component is about 12%. I think looking back last year, it was about 10%. So you're seeing the impact of these special purpose grants increase over time. It adds value to our revenues, but again, it kind of moves the money into a different direction. So again, all told, 92% of our operating and special purpose grants come from Ministry of Education and Childcare, with the 8% coming from other sources. So that's the revenue side. We express our expenditures in the form of by object and by function, and you'll see that articulated in both the budget document as well as the financial statement document. But again, just recognize them by object basically breaks it down by employee group and by benefits, and then by salaries, services and supplies. And there's a breakdown even amongst that, because embedded in services and supplies are, of course, transportation costs, utilities, those kind of functions. But again, recognizing that 33% of our budget is spent on teacher wages and salaries, 6% on PVP. Support staff, you can see at 9%. Other professional are exempt staff, so that's folks working out at the school board office and other managers spread out around the district. But again, all this to say that 80% of our budget is basically embedded in wages and benefits. So we talk about the fact that we don't have a lot of discretionary funding, and it's because a lot of these costs are tied up in collective agreements or class size language or the nature of how we do business kind of thing. That's not to say that we don't make decisions of a discretionary nature, but by default, we're kind of tied to the kids and that kind of stuff. As an expression of the same cost by function, you can see how it's broken down by what we call function 1, which is instruction, and that includes the classroom instruction, that includes special ed instruction, that includes international programming, it includes, drawing a blank, or counseling, that kind of thing. Then we talk about district administration, and that's the governance, that's the board office expenditures in terms of the board itself, their board trustees and the Board of Education. It includes the superintendent's office, the business office, and the HR embedded in that. Operations and maintenance. Operations and maintenance is your trade staff. That's the custodial team. That's the maintenance operations administration, and utilities are embedded in that. Transportation housing is truly our housing. We've got a small amount that we pay for the False Bay students living off their off the Lasqueti Island, attending secondary here. So there's a small component of that, but the bulk of it is obviously our transportation department, drivers and utility, or drivers and costs associated with running the bus systems. And then special purposes, just a re-expression of the same value in both of those. So again, at the end of the day, 82%, and that's combining the special purpose funds because, because again, 99.9% of that special purpose fund is funding classroom education, and then obviously the instruction side is the other 70% to make up the 82 on classroom and educational programs. Moving on. So another way that, again, another thing that we share out obviously is just recognizing what our complement of staffing is made up of. And so again, we talk about teachers, we talk about support staff, and we talk about admin team. And the admin team in this case is PVP as well as the exempt staff. So you can see the exempt staff and PVP generally has fluctuated, coming close to the 50-50 mark. And again, you can see that expressed over here for sometimes the numbers aren't necessarily discernible on the graph. So again, all we're showing is obviously in 06, there were 42 admin team, became 41 when those 4 schools were reorganized and closed in 14-15. And then since that time, we've added vice principals to all our schools and all our staff, as well as adding a couple of managing positions based on the priorities of the ministry and on BCPC, like health and wellness coordinators. Likewise, you can see with the FTE, our student count is kind of just recognizing that over the course of time, student count came down, and likewise the teacher complement went down during that time, as did support staff, as did, as I say, admin time. And then since that time, although we're certainly not, we haven't rebounded back to what's stated here, but we've been adding teachers over the course of time. We've been adding support staff over the course of time, and then adding back as needed in the administrative team. That's my commercial break. Another way of expressing, obviously, the support staff is looking at how the complement of that comes out. And so we've got the blue representing educational assistants. You've got the red representing the clerical and library library assistants, sorry. O&M is made up of custodials, trades, grounds crew, and then transportation of the bus drivers and the transportation admin team. Yeah, so again, recognizing that this is staffing generally follows the student enrollment trends, and some exceptions that I'll note are on account of either funding, new sources of funding coming to deliver additional staffing, as well as some obviously internal decision making to recognize the funding losses that were happening prior to 13-14. So again, drawing your attention to the purple line, which is transportation, in about 9-10, there were a series of reviews, 9-10, and then again in 13-14, where the routes of the day were rationalized based on the fact that they were getting less kids and they didn't need as many buses. So I think we rationalized from about 28 or 29 routes at that time, which obviously needed a bus driver for each of them. And then obviously during this period, I think about 5 routes were taken out of service, obviously leading to less bus drivers, and therefore that's what you're seeing, that re-rationalization there. And then since that time, we've added a couple of additional mechanics to the department that you're seeing a bit of a growth, as well as I think we've added a couple of First Nations bus runs. Red again is clerical librarian. Again, this decline here is recognizing the fact that we closed schools in the 13 to 15, 11, 12, and again 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 14, 15 kind of thing is when the closures were happening, which is why they were obviously needing less staff in the schools because we had 4 less schools. O&M, you can see it was been fairly consistent up to this point. Over the course of time, cuts were made, obviously, during this period, recognizing that between about 9-10, and again, this predates me, but it certainly, I'm sure some of the board members remember when the cuts were annual. And so there was a period of time that every year they had to find about $500,000 to $800,000 in savings during this period, which led up to that reorg decision in 13-14. The decision was made, and it became effective in 14-15. So again, that's what you're seeing there. Likewise, because of the less buildings, you had less custodians during this period on the O&M side. Since COVID, we've added back some of those custodians. We've increased the cleaning practices at the site. And generally speaking, we've maintained that over the course of the 5-year recovery from COVID, which is why the green line is back up to where it was pre. The blue area obviously is the EAs, and again, some of these increases are a result of classroom enhancement. Some of the funding was a lot from the classroom enhancement special purpose fund was used to support the classroom teacher with additional EA supports. But likewise, you're also seeing some of the increase in revenues or the increase of grants coming from special needs kids, able to add back into this employee classification or this employee group. And so you can see how it's, if you look at this one, you can see how it was around 79, and over the course of the first years it declined a little bit, and then it was brought back to that 79, and then since that time it's rebounded considerably up to about the 92 mark. Again, recognizing the needs of the system, and recognizing that obviously these kids need support. No hands, we'll carry on. So some of the considerations obviously that are coming to us, and then we'll share out. Again, I speak to some of the budget risk. We know that the new collective agreement, which is now in year 3, or will be going into year 3 of the 3-year agreement. We know that it comes with some settlement dollars for the teachers and the support staff grid. I've kind of talked about it here. 2% lift with a COLA adjustment of up to 1%. So it's likely going to be a 3% lift for teachers and support staff. Historically, the ministry didn't fund exempt staff increases. Any increases that were given to exempt staff had to be found within the operating fund, and so it was at the board's discretion. The last 2 years, because of these two fairly large and fairly substantial increases, the ministry supported funding the exempt staff. So thankfully they were able to support the first 2 years. They just haven't announced whether or not they'll support the third year lift. So again, we need to keep that in mind in terms of putting aside value should that be needed. Other cost pressures that we'll that we'll talk about a little bit. Supply costs, I mean, I think we all are familiar that coming out of COVID, supply chain issues, as well as cost escalations, the impact on not just our grocery budget, but obviously on everything that we buy. In terms of our impact, obviously it's hitting our school supplies, it's hitting our district supplies. Our director of operations talks about the cost of a 2x4 or the cost of an 8x4 plywood kind of thing. I think he said they've doubled in cost, as it were. I'll have to find out because I'm going to Home Hardware this weekend to find out myself. The point being, it is going up there, and again, we recognize that not just supplies in that regard. We talk about the fuel costs going up. We talk about many of these other areas that are not just impacting the pocketbook of our individual as consumers, but it's obviously impacting the school district's budgets. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits component and the pressures that are being felt in the budget around that, as well as the replacement costs, the impact of post-COVID employee wellness. And then again, the increased use of special purpose funds, shifting the funding. And again, we appreciate the funding. This isn't to say that we don't want the funding or anything else. And 9 times out of 10, the initiatives of the ministry match what we would have done anyways. And it just sometimes they do dovetail in it, and it just kind of reduces the options that we have to deliver these things. But point being, increased use of special purpose to deliver on ministry initiatives. So we'll talk a little bit about the budget or the enrollment projections. I always start with this lens, which is looking at our cohorts. So our grade kindergarten, our grade 1, our grade 2, as you can see across the grade 12 in 2-year views. So the blue being the September 2022 cohort of K, and then you can see beside it in red is the September 23 grid or cohort. For reference sake, you'll notice that the blue in kindergarten becomes the red in grade 1 to give you context. So generally speaking, in a healthy, growing, if you want, school district, you'll want to see the cohort increase with each successive year. And so in a healthy sort of school district, you'll see that. And so that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the blue converted to the red is up. The blue converted to the red is up. The blue converted to the red is up, etc. across the line. Where this kind of chart is helpful is when you see that the cohorts by grade 12 are much larger. Naturally, not only was there a larger component starting in K to hit this, but obviously it's been fed with each successive cohort and with each successive year. So that by grade 12, we've got about 323 in the system, and they will graduate this year. And you'll see on our next one that we're projecting about 250 kids coming into kindergarten and starting in with our district. So we know that we will, even without any net migration, we're already behind 73 kids that we need a net migration into the system to recover for, as it were, just because we've got larger cohorts exiting than we have incoming kids. And again, that's just the dynamic that every district is going to be considering as they plan for next year. Ours isn't as extreme as I've seen them in many years. Like I think 10 years ago, if you had viewed this, you would have seen a disparity of maybe 100 kids between the exiting and out, or actually about 20 years ago, I guess, to be honest, when the districts actually were building schools at that time. And so every year, not only were they losing these large incremental numbers, but on the flip side, they at least had in certain years they had some rebound going into the district to backfill that loss.
If Dr. Jory wants to jump in.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Flynn. My mic, let me put my mic in position. A couple of things to point out here. Number one is it's a curious thing that our local birth rate is as low as it is. And it may have something to do with a lack of family appropriate housing in the area. But nonetheless, you can see that we have our outbound cohort is much larger than our inbound cohort. And so that causes us some reason to pause. As I said in this afternoon session, districts do have a habit of being very conservative when it comes to their projections because it is much more difficult to reduce your staff and if you overestimate your student population than it is to add staff contractually. And so there is a tendency to be cautious. I do think, as I said earlier, it is a better practice to try and get as close as possible. But because of the different sizes of these cohorts, even though it's going to likely be offset by inbound students, it is still prudent for us to show some caution here, as Mr. Amos will explain. I do want to add one piece that's a little bit sunnier in a way, financially at least, that I didn't mention in any of our earlier conversations, and that is, as much as we are doing a very nice job graduating our students and had recently two of the best sets of results with 90+% of our kids graduating, we probably won't get to 100% in our graduation this year. A portion of those students will be back to us for a sixth year, and that will mean in 20 to 30 kids will likely be offsetting this. Now, of course, we are doing our darndest to get them over the hump, get their credits completed, and move them on to the world. But in fairness, we'll likely fall short of 100%.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay. So the other lens that I kind of bring to this, and again, it's clearer in the numbers, and again, so for context, what you're looking at, obviously, I think I've got 9 years, no, more than that, 15 years, 14 years across there. So again, what you're looking at is our three programs. We're looking at the regular, what we call our regular programming, the bricks and mortar schools. We've got an alternate program there, and we've got our distributed learning values there. And again, because distributed learning is counted 3 times a year based on that course credit, there's a count in September, there's a count in February, there's a count in May. These numbers are the aggregation of those 3 count cycle. So again, expressing the obvious here, but in 11-12 we had 3,974 FTE regular kids. We had 122 alternate kids. We had the 210 FTE equivalent within the distributed learning over the course of the year, all adding up to about 4,305. Going across, and again, all I'm trying to do is recognize that between 4,305 and 4,207, we lost an FTE, if you want, or a funded amount of about 98 kids that year. And so that's what that expression is going across. So recognizing that this was not really the penultimate low point, but again, it's the nadir, I think, of the low point. And then so they were going down, down, down. And then since that time, we've had fairly moderate but consistent increases over the course of time. With some vagaries, as we talked about that outlier in the COVID year. So, so looking at the cohorts in each of these years, I'm showing you what our grade cohort was for kindergarten and what our grade cohort was for the graduating class, the grade 12s. And so you can see with each successive year, so with 282 entered the system in that year, but again, what you're going to see is that we're comparing against the exit versus the incoming. And so I guess we'll go to the end here. So if we're projecting 250 kids coming into the system, they are replacing the 323 grade 12s going out of the system. And again, that's just simple math, about 51 kids during that period and 73 during the current period. Once you take those numbers away, and again, recognizing that this is that differential, and then just divide or using simple math, saying if these are the changes, then the default here is the net migration into the system, whether they are cohorts coming in or kids are shifting from one program to another kind of thing. Because what you may get is people choosing to either leave the regular program into our alternate program or into the DL program. But again, all of these differentials are on account of either a net migration to and from our district or a program change. All that's saying is, in order for us to cover off that loss in cohort differential, we need some net migration of about 73 into the district. And again, that's what you're trying to do when it comes to these projections, is to predict what value this is going to be, because we all obviously from the data coming from the September snapshot, we already know what this differential is, and all we're trying to do is predict what kind of inflow into the district over the course of the year, and then at the end of the year when September comes around. So that's, again, that's the elements going on when we try to predict this thing. Yeah, and it's not always perfect, as alluded to with the superintendent. But again, you try to be cautious, you try to be conservative, knowing that it's easier to add those funds back into the system than it is to take away those funds once the school has begun. All good?
Yep, no
So-
questions or no hands. Yep.
No questions, okay.
Onward.
The train moves on.
Yep.
So another expression of that, again, and it's just a visual representation of those cohorts expressed here. Green is DL, red is alt, blue is regular programming. And again, recognizing that this actually, obviously, the 0 of the y-axis is actually down here, so it's not exactly, but it is meant to represent sort of the top of the bar, so that way you can see sort of the differentials of the green changing over the course of time, differentials of the red changing over the course of time, and then obviously all other blue is just represented in terms of our growth in the bricks and mortar. So again, without putting too much into it, what you're seeing, so if you look at COVID hitting here, kids left the system, they left the bricks and mortar programming, and effectively through our work, they found their either a blended kind of learning in the bricks and mortar, or they found DL, or they went to DL that we were able to sort of supply staffing for that at the time. But so what you're seeing is during COVID, obviously families made choices that was best for them. And then what we tried to do is obviously gain back that trust in 21, 22. And so what you've seen is some of these kids came back into the system, so that this growth line continued regardless of the blue drop here. But again, that's what you're really seeing is without this drop, the trend line would have been across here. And then these kids are coming back into the system, which is why the blue line goes up in each of these successive years a little bit more than normal. So this, you can't necessarily, and I guess my point being is you can't depend on this being the trend line, because in many cases it's the kids coming back from the DL program or coming back from the alternate program and registering in the bricks and mortar, which is appropriate, because again, if that meets their needs, then that's appropriate. And again, all we're really saying is over the course of time, we're being cautious in terms of our expectations of future years, recognizing we don't see any large growth in the district visually or via cohorts. And so we're just being conservative by nature in terms of what we're thinking that next year and the year after will look like. No hands up.
Oh, no hands.
Okay, so as long as we have an understanding of our enrollment, so all of this is to say our projections will be based on no growth going forward. Now, again, I'll talk about that because that will directly impact the March announcement that we'll get in terms of what we project for funding. Yes, there will likely be recalculated, sorry, not recalculated. Yes, there will be modified formula to address the per pupil funding, to address the bargaining collective agreement settlements. The question becomes, is there going to be more money added to it beyond that to support some of these other pressures that that we're feeling? And that will remain to be seen at this point. So again, other pressures that we're feeling, obviously the replacement costs. This is not a new topic. The last couple of years, we've been talking about it in terms of us having to get ahead of it. And so you can see TTOCs, who are obviously the replacement staff of teachers. The red are the replacement staff of our support positions. For the most part, they've been level up until 17, 18, and then obviously teachers started going up a little bit. Some of this is a function of increase in wage increases, as it were, and some of it is a function of more time taken. But we'll see that kind of in another chart after this. But again, recognizing that it's not the full picture by any means. We do recognize that over the course of time between 12-13, where the combined replacement cost was about 1.2, and now it's almost doubled. We recognize that wage rates during that period have also gone up substantially, particularly in this last bargaining period. But again, point being, it kind of illustrates the fact that we don't get additional funding for these replacement costs. These costs have to be borne by our operating fund directly. And so it really means the pressure on other areas, because we're having to obviously take money out of the classroom, as it were, and build it into our budget to support the replacement needs. And again, we recognize replacement costs are indicative of a different scenario after COVID. We know that obviously colds, flu season, we're always present in our system, but certainly since COVID and now the last couple of years, RSV has become the new health concern. But again, those four areas obviously are impacting us. Sometimes we're okay in the fall, but worse off in the spring, and sometimes it's reverse. We just recognize that within the budget context that we have to cover these things. Okay.
Nope, no questions.
Crickets.
You're
We got
covering all
crickets.
the bases.
Either I'm really good or yeah. Okay, so again, the other lens obviously is the number of days sick, and again, this takes it away from, or this reduces the query in terms of the implications of the salary increases, and this is just looking at the usage. And so we've shared this out with our employee groups in terms of the expression of the impact. But again, it's another visual way of saying the sick days are increasing of usage. And again, in this case, it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily driven by COVID, as we talked about. It was increasing even before COVID. In the teacher side, the drop here is because we were closed, as you recall, in April and May of 2021. 2020. Oh,
19,
okay. No, sorry.
19,
Sorry. Yeah.
19,
So yeah. So here's COVID.
19.
And yeah. So COVID happened in 2020, March 2020. We closed in April and May, and then obviously people felt confident coming back into the system. Sick days obviously came down a little bit. Having been open for a year, I guess is the expression here, COVID raised its head again. That's really what you're seeing the trend here. It didn't necessarily happen the same way in the support staff, whereas 2021 is here. This is year over year, and I guess I should have started with that. This is year over year presentation. So this is September to January in 2023. This number represents September to January in the year 22-23. So it is a year over year, and it's really in context to how we did this time last year in both of these categories. But again, it's representative. Sometimes it's representative of a really awful fall. And so the hope would be that maybe spring is a healthier spring, and these numbers over the course of each new month aggregating up to the whole will soften the impact, and that we won't keep going up, but we might settle off to what we had last year. Remains to be seen. We've still got to get through the next 4.5 months. Yeah. Other cost pressures, benefits, like I said, some of the, and again, the narrative up here is some of these benefit costs are funded through ministry grants, through the recalc, not the recalc, through the funding formula. If they're bargained, like benefit increases or benefit betterments, as it were, then generally speaking, the ministry will fund those within the operating grants. But there's other cost drivers embedded in here that we're on the hook for, as it were, and I talk about WCB. And so in this case, WCB is predicated on two rates or two values, your local rate, how you're doing against the sector rate, which is the provincial sector of school K-12 education. And generally speaking, both of those components of the WCB rate are going up. So provincially, and I think there's elements of obviously mental health issues. There's all elements of post-COVID and all those, the stressors that are occurring, and the impact that WCB is making claims on those, or making claims on WCB for those purposes. It's pressuring obviously the provincial sector, K-12, and locally, obviously, there's things that we can do locally to, with our health and wellness programs to, again, help make staff well, so that we're not necessarily tapping into the WCB component. So there's things that we can do from that side to reduce our costs. But generally speaking, what you're seeing is obviously there is a benefit increases over the course of time. And once again, most of those costs get covered off, but not all of them do. And again, that's something that we have to address in budget.
No questions.
No questions.
No questions.
Is there a hockey game on tonight or something that we
Yeah,
everybody
there is.
must? If we all want to get to the TV.
It
Okay.
starts in 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll see
Oh,
what I can
7.
do. Yeah, 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
So ministry priorities, again, we're talking about some of the things that the ministry is putting on our plate. So again, recognizing the obviously the imperative of the ministry now that childcare is enveloped into the Ministry of Education mandate, then it gets even a higher significance for us. So not only was the capital funding supported about 6 years ago, but now the operating side. And so you can see that for context, we currently have within our schools 21 classrooms being used as spaces for operating these childcare programs, of which 5 of them are being run by the school district or supported by the school district. We've got a seamless daycare pilot program running at Arrington, as well as an after-school program running there. We've got an Oceanside. We've got an after-school program that opened up in September at Oceanside. Bowser the same. We opened an after-school program there. And Arrowview, that we had that purpose-built building on the site that's being run by the Oceanside Building and Learning Together. And out of that, they operate a preschool as well as an after-school program. Conceptually, the idea, and yeah, the revenues are being generated obviously from the parents' fees to pay for the expenses. What we have is responsible adults that run the after-school programs, and then we have an ECE that's funded by the Seamless Daycare Grant at the Arrington site. But generally speaking, the revenues support these programming are the parent fees. There's about 3 or 4 streams of Ministry of Education and Child Care grants, some for operating, some for wage subsidy. We don't get that one, but there is that one out for other ones, as well as a subsidized component. Subsidized component on behalf of the parents that come directly to us as we send in reports to the ministry. And then likewise, we got a third, if you want, a third stream of funding coming from the Sources Society, and they support some staffing with a shared interest of some of the kids coming to our program in the after school side of things. The seamless daycare, like I said, that is, I think we're on the third year of the pilot, and so they have it. A pilot that lasted 3 years, call it what you want. But anyways, it's they have indicated, because obviously they need to move on to other initiatives and recognize that maybe there's another sort of another wave of seamless daycare needing commitments. Anyways, they've indicated to us that 24-25 will be the last year of it being supported. So then we sort of have that challenge of, is it self-funding, and how can we continue to support the program itself? So that's the operating component of the childcare. On the capital side, as I said, the Arrowview funds. Sorry about that. Can you hear that?
Yep.
Or is
we
it,
knew
or is,
the-
okay,
no,
the phone ringing.
site. Oh,
Okay,
look at that.
so
The
it's
Arrowview
likely
site.
only bugging me and not necessarily you folks, but so the New Spaces funding is the capital component of the childcare program. And again, it was initially started that where you'd make applications to the Ministry of Childcare, and there were several sort of things that were included in that package. Obviously, working with PAC in terms of the need, working with local parents in terms of the need, addressing the issue of, are there other daycares operating in that area? Is there space within the school to locate a daycare? What kind of partners are you sharing with? Anyways, so that process it was an old process that sort of on its way out, in a sense, now that they've now that childcare has moved within, I guess, as I say, the mandate of Ministry of Education, they're recognizing that they need to sort of streamline the process to support school districts in addressing these capital builds, as it were. And so Director of Operations and myself sat in on a December first look at it. And again, if it comes to be, the announcement will be in March. But the idea is, what they're trying to do is obviously move the capital submission for daycare spaces into the realm of our normal minor and major capital submissions that we do anyways when it comes to renovations and school enhancement funds and that kind of nature. They're trying to obviously make it sort of one-stop shopping when it comes to our MyCaps submissions. So anyway, more on that later if it's to come to be. But again, it is recognizing that they're doing what the ministry is doing what they can to support putting these daycares, if not in schools, but on school property. And again, this streamlined application program will support that initiative and certainly make it easier for us to make application again. Obviously, the other stream is early care and learning grant that we received for the first time last year. So we'll be getting or 2 years ago. So we'll be getting funding for a third year in 24-25. And again, this continues to support the work of our principal of early learning, Sheila Morrison. And again, it dovetails with the childcare portfolio that she carries. The other stream, obviously, or the other theme that the ministry announced last year was the Feeding Future funds. So we're currently in the first year of it. Next year we'll be in the year 2 of the 3-year commitment. So again, with that announcement last year, the ministry committed 3 years for a total annual for us about $520,000 for supplies and staffing to support the theme of feeding futures, feeding kids that need it, so that they come to school ready to learn and not having to deal with the issue of being hungry. We've always had a program in the district. We've heard it. Our associate superintendent speaks to it quite eloquently in terms of the backpack program that we've supported, starting with a community agency our community volunteers and then integrating itself into the work that we do to support kids and families. But again, it's recognizing, utilizing the strength of that program with the new funding to being able to deliver the backpack program, as well as in school needs, giving funds to schools directly to manage some of their food programs, their breakfast programs, and their lunch programs. Part and parcel, obviously, with all operating dollars, luckily capital dollars come with it too. And so this is the new program that was embedded in the minor capital in June of last year, called the Food Infrastructure Program. Sorry, Angel. I'll get you in a second, but I'll just finish my thought. The Food Infrastructure Program. So it was announced in June. So we put a submission in for kitchen renovations at KSS and Winchelsea. We got notification of that shortly thereafter, to be honest. And so we were able to get 103,000. That again, it's a work in progress in terms of the work that O&M and Director of Operations Phil is working on. We also submitted last year for the 24-25 year a second submission for an extra or for an additional 100,419 for additional equipment, recognizing that obviously some of the school kitchens need to be refreshed somewhat to offer additional support within the school. That hasn't been announced. And yeah, so that hasn't been announced, and we'll find out for sure in March when they announce the capital funding.
So Angel, I just caught yours as well. Thanks, Ron, for picking it up. Just for folks to know, Angel's asked, I want to make sure I understand. We have one more year of specialized funding for the seamless daycare at Arrington. Once this funding ends at the end of June 2025, our district either has to fund it out of our education funding budget or we have to shut it down.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's I won't say that that's typical of any of the pilot projects kind of thing. Again, the recognition from the ministry and Associate Superintendent Wilson might be able to elaborate a little bit more, but certainly that's kind of the work of the pilot project in terms of we'll fund you, get you started. And they, again, as I indicated, they renewed it for a couple of years because there was a lot of not issues, I guess it's not really, there was a lot of areas to investigate in terms of being able to deliver it. Go ahead, Joe.
Administrative things. Yeah, you're on mute, Joe. Yeah.
It's become a really worthwhile and an important program over at Arrington Elementary School. Certainly the after school component won't go away. There's needs for that, and it would have to be again a decision that the board make whether we have an ECE in the classroom, which is part of the Seamless, who stays there to do the after school component in the evening.
So we're straddling two domains here between before school care and after school care, which can be pretty much accommodated site-based, but it's the daycare piece that then takes in a space issue and things like that, and cost.
The Seamless Day is a little bit different than a daycare. The Seamless Day is an early childhood educator working alongside an educator in the classroom. And so they then stay with students after school in the after school component. So it is a little bit different than just the after school components of the childcare that we're part of.
Yeah, and the grants recognizing that you're not collecting fees from the parents while the child is in school, but it's the transition of the ECE that allows for the transition to the before, if there happens to be one, or the after school component. There's no fees to be generated to support that ECE staffing, whereas there are fees to be generated to support the responsible adult component of staffing an after school program.
So further up, Angels, I miss how much the government has given for us and the pilot project? It's substantial. Associate Superintendent Wilson, I might call on you to think of what the numbers have been, but it's been relatively substantial over 3 years now.
We receive $55,000 a year that pays for the wages for that position and any operational expenses in terms of materials and things.
And some administrative support that got built
Yeah.
into,
Mhm.
Trustee Kurland.
Thanks. So I'm just a little bit confused with, Qualicum has just opened the Into the Woods childcare, and I'm wondering how, is that funded by Ministry of Education childcare too, or is it separate? How did they do that? How is this?
They
It's not.
they did the same thing as we did. They applied almost yeah,
Same
almost
time.
lockstep with us. So they submitted my little, I won't say, yeah, my little pat on the back for our district is the fact that we both applied about the same time. We both received approval about the same time, but we were able to open about 18 months sooner. Huh. Anyways, but point being, we both applied together, as it were. It wasn't intended by any means, but it was just circumstance that they applied at the same time as we did. Because I remember going to the share out when we were walking the site in terms of where they were looking to build it. When we already obviously knew where we were building it anyways.
Yeah.
So we had a bit of a leg up on that. So yeah, so they applied through the New Spaces funding.
So so they're funded by the ministry also?
Well, the capital is, right?
Yeah,
So
okay.
so again, this is the New Spaces funding. It's not directed just to school districts. It's directed to municipalities. So beside
Okay.
us, the Boys and Girls Club, City of
Yeah.
Parksville partnered with the Boys and Girls Club to apply for the New Spaces grant to renovate the PCCC. And so that was funded by this New Spaces funding. As you say, the Into the Woods was funded by it. Yeah, like it wasn't just school districts.
Not for
Certainly,
profits. Yeah.
yeah, well, in partnership
Other
with
districts.
these other entities, as it were.
Yeah.
So they're looking at individuals or looking at organizations that have land, as it were, to be able to build these purpose-built units, if you want, or programs in place. And so, yes, you had municipalities in partnership with school districts. You had other organizations. Again, I don't know of any circumstances, but it wouldn't stop for example, a hospital if they had need to sort of support that kind of initiative. Again, it was all recognizing using public lands to support the builds of these things.
So along with that, I mean, do we provide transpo, to from if they're doing say childcare in the mornings or afternoons, are the school bus system allied with that, or is it just kids that are not ready to go to school yet?
We do. I mean, and Director of Operations could expand on this a little bit, but we've always, if the routes and if the seats support it, we've always allowed, if you want, for ridership that might happen to have a stop near a local school. So but again, it's not built around. We don't build our transportation department around it by any means, but it does happen that we do go
Okay.
by one of our childcare centers that are operating out of the Craig Street Commons, for example.
Yeah.
And obviously we operate, I think there's a bus stop at Qualicum Commons that obviously if you happen to have your child there, you would utilize if you could.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, by the nature that if we can service these parents, these families, with drop-offs that facilitate an easier transition, we do as best we can if the seats are available. But we don't put on extra routes to service them. It's just
Right.
if the seats
Okay.
are available. Yeah.
I get it. Okay.
Does that work, Phil?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. We do that for Qualicum Commons and Craig Street Commons if we have the capacity, which we're able to manage at the moment.
Operative word at the moment.
That's right.
Capital.
Capital. So some of the obviously capital planning considerations. And again, it's really from the lens that because capital planning has its own schedule, it's got its own funding formula. It's got I spoke to the minor capital and the major capital works. And so within that context, they've always had a separate schedule to the operating budget. and it dovetails to the end of the year. And so what we have currently is we, through Director of Operations, submit a minor capital request in September. We have a major capital request that goes to the ministry in June, and we have our annual facility grant informational, if you want, because it's an annual cycle of funding no matter what. But we do submit a plan for spending of it in about May, I think. I don't know if there's a nod, but anyways, April, May.
Yep.
And why the wonder right now is there's been a cycle of change in terms of when these things get submitted, and so we're still getting kind of used to that new schedule and the new cycle. But point being, so there's always been a capital component to everything we do, that basically is outside the work of the operating budget and the special purpose budget considerations. But again, as we go into the next series of slides, there are implications that we do continue to share with the board in terms of some of our facilities and needs and the needs that are coming to the fore. So without further ado, we've shared this out at Finance and Operations. So we've had this on the Finance and Ops table for a number of years now, kind of thing, and trying to address the wonders around, first of all, do we recover on the costs that the direct costs that we pay out for utilities, custodial insurance, and some recovery for operational supplies, custodial supplies. So the first question is obviously, do we recover that? And so lately, obviously, we have been. You can see Family Place, there's about a surplus of $4,800. Qualicum Commons, there's about a $16,000 surplus in a sense. Craig Street Commons, we hadn't been recovering, or about 38,000 shortfall, and then French Creek School about a $5,000 shortfall. But again, this is really only addressing the costs that we can point to as direct costs. Again, utilities, custodial, insurance, and supplies. But there's a lot of indirect costs that we can't and don't get allocated against sites. And again, that includes the grounds crew, they includes the trades who manage the work orders that come from the tenants in these sites, the administrative burden on board office staff and O&M staff in terms of managing tenants. Not that they're difficult by any means, but the point being, they do have, obviously, they come with a workload. And that whether they're the license to occupy, so we handle out of the out of the board office, or it's the lease arrangements on the ground that O&M handles with the tenants. But point being, they come with an administrative burden, and we've always made it clear with the board that we're not very good landlords in a sense. It's not our bailiwick, and so at the end of the day, we at least hope to recover the direct costs. It's the areas that we can't address through normal channels is the capital costs that are borne by these sites over the course of the last 10 years. We can't make application to the ministry for minor capital improvements. We can't make application on boiler replacements or on roof replacements on these sites because they're not deemed as educational use. And so it becomes the burden of a district to pay for these things or find money for these things. And so clearly that's why so many districts in the province, when they close the school, they shutter them because they recognize that even though there might be some short-term use out of it over the medium years or 5 to 10 years kind of thing, over the course of time, you can't get to these bigger cost items. And so again, these numbers are coming from what we know as coming up in the next 1 to 5 years kind of thing. We got roof replacements to the tune of $1 million or 937 and 451. We've got HVAC units to be replaced. We've got electrical safety and alarm systems needing replacing, and we've got electrical systems needing infusion, as it were, of money, and boilers. And so again, it's really the lens of if not in capital, then where? And so the burden of obviously for these costs is borne on other things. And so the operating budget is the one that could feel the hit, certainly in the indirect costs. On the capital cost, it's not even being entertained that these costs come from operating, but it is something that we have to make the board aware of. And then the other lens that we take to when it comes to our capital planning, and again, this was shared in finance and ops, but the VFA is an inventory, is a facility. Don't ask me what it stands for, but I think that's the company that does it more than anything. But it's the facility inventory of needs, and so there's a 5-year review, on-site review, that the VFA will come around, walk the sites with our director of ops, and look at the site. So every 5 years, the inventory gets refreshed with what are the needs outstanding on these sites. It gets itemized, it gets calculated, it gets estimated, and it gets thrown into this this inventory of things to do. And then on an annual cycle, as things get addressed with the support of the board through these capital initiatives or AF annual facility grant funding, that inventory of items gets refreshed annually to say that, okay, we've now addressed the roof, we'll put that in, and so that obviously extends the life of the roof for another 25 years. Same thing with if we replace a boiler, we've reported in the inventory system, and then obviously the costs or that cost gets pushed back by 20 years or depending on the life of the boiler. And so what you're seeing obviously in this VFA or facility condition index is expressed down here. It's the total cost needed in building repairs and renewal divided by the current cost of replacing. So if in fact, and I'll use an open site, so Qualicum Beach, for example, is indicated within the system as a $13 million replacement cost, but on that inventory list is about $5.1 or $5.2 million worth of renewal and replacement repairs, then they would express that as a 0.4 on the FCI index. So that's what you're seeing across the top here. So it stands to reason when the reorg occurred and they were looking at which buildings would we keep open, which buildings would we close in 2014. As you can see why those decisions were made predominantly is because they were the older or they had the worst facilities conditions of the time, and they remain true today. So French Creek, as we've talked about in recent months, certainly has the highest in the district, followed next by Craig Street Commons, followed next by Winchelsea. The caveat to Winchelsea is the fact that because we're running educational programs in there, we can make application to the ministry to use minor capital and major capital to fund some of the needs at Winchelsea. Case in point, a new roof going in there. Arrowview and Oceanside, again, we can address these concerns through minor and major capital. Qualicum Commons, we can't. And so those are the 4 that are kind of are on the wonder list in terms of this representation: the French Creek School, the Craig Street Commons, and the Qualicum Commons kind of thing. So four schools, sorry. But again, this is why we have these conversations. This is why we bring it to the board, to recognize that some of these buildings are reaching end of life, as it were, and we just have to recognize what is next, what would be next, should we have an appetite to do something.
It's kind of like a deficiency index that we're given, and if you can make the repairs to the deficiencies, and you claw back a bit of time, but in the big picture of things, it's giving you the plan from another outside group lens to look at our deficiencies.
Yeah, because they're effectively a third party weighing in and saying, these are the items, this is their end of life. And again, some of these values within the FCI costs are roofing, boilers, cladding, so siding in buildings, as well as carpets, as well as painting, as well as tiles needing to be refreshed or windows being refreshed. So it really does look at the building itself and recognize that these things, like any homeowner, need to be addressed in time, and puts a value on it. BC STAs, the School Trustees Association, correct me what year it was, but
Yeah.
a couple of years ago,
Yes, sir.
put a survey, not a survey, but put a report out in
Analysis.
hope, in hopes of getting ministry support. But again, they called it a deferred maintenance
Yeah.
report, and it's
Yeah.
accessible online. And it really speaks to the fact that provincially, if our number is 82.5 million, multiply that by whatever number you want to come up to the fact that the ministry has a big ticket item to address. And the argument from BCTA at the time was all about not putting enough money into major, minor, and AFG to support the renewal of the existing buildings that we have. And so
think-
what, oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
They're gonna do a refresh of that report this spring. And so the BCSTA will continue to work on this one, but it hasn't moved the dial very much overall,
No.
basically.
I mean, you think about the best of intentions of the ministry. I mean, seismic became the
Huge.
dominant issue about 25 years ago. And so that sapped quite a bit of their money. And again, there wasn't a large building program during that time in the districts because, again, recognizing that provincially most districts were in decline anyways. So it really wasn't about a building program within the province. It was about, okay, we've got capital funding, we've got to set aside some funding and create a program to address the seismic needs. Fast forward to 3 years ago, when the provincial picture changed rapidly in terms of the needs for Surrey growth and the needs now Sooke growth kind of thing. And then the shift in focus in terms of an expansion program within the government, recognizing that they needed to address some large increases in growth in districts, because up to that point, without the capital infusion for a replacement or a new build, local school districts have to find the short-term measures by buying modulars and portables, and they buy that within their operating fund. And so clearly the shift happened even this fall in terms of how can they address it much more quicker. And so you've had this big upswell of modular builds for entire wings of schools. Sooke is getting two 8-classroom wings at their elementaries, with the hope that they can, between approval and students in the seats kind of thing, it's now shorten the timing down to like 18 months, where it used to be about 5 months. Peter, Superintendent Tory.
5 years probably you meant. Yeah, and I think when we look at this, we recognize there are some shortcomings to the system they use, or at least some things that we don't understand. And we note that those totals for replacement are probably on the light side, noting that a secondary school probably is more like 70 to 80 million instead of 50 million now, as costs have continue to escalate. So I still think that this is useful information for comparison's sake and for contextual sake as we enter into our decision-making processes. So I think it's good for us to kind of acknowledge it.
High on the ball. Yep.
Okay, that's
Next.
capital. So just to recap the budget planning process.
Excuse me, I have my hand up.
Oh, sorry, can't see you, Julie. Sorry, go ahead. Trustee Austin?
Ron, yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, Ron, why the FCI changed so much for French Creek. We had a report back in June of the FCI of all our sites. And French Creek was sort of in the middle. Let's see, Oceanside was about the same FCI, but Winchelsea, Springwood, Craig Street Commons were all higher. So I'm just wondering what happened in less than a year that jumped French Creek up.
Straight, I made the same observation. Don't misunderstand. When I looked at these numbers in 2022, which was the numbers that you're referring to, these were the numbers. I mean, I don't generate the numbers. I'm just running the report out of VFA. And then when I looked at it last month, these were the new values. So part of it is I didn't know if some of it is subject to escalations or some new costs coming to the fore. Like I said, this FCI cost isn't necessarily everything that's in the inventory. It's only the inventory that now the window has now moved to be 5 to 10 years kind of thing. So my only wonder is that there were some new items that are now coming due and needing to be renewed on some of these sites like French Creek that weren't in there 2 years ago, that maybe they were 12 years out in 2022 and now they're 10 years out, which means they've kind of
Balls in the
moved
bucket.
they moved the parameters. Director of Operations
maybe-
might have some insight.
Director of Operations, Mr. Monroe.
Yeah, thanks. The one thing I would mention is that as Secretary Treasurer Amos made note of, that the company that does our assessments and does it for all the school districts in the province, they came and attended site in 2022 and spent a couple of weeks going through each different site. Then they go away, and early 23 we probably get the updated inventory, and so in a 5-year period we're updating them on projects over 50,000 that we've done in each site, and that's the only thing that they really change in the database. And then when they came in late 22, they do a really thorough analysis, and then that's when you'll see every 5 years you'll see a really big change when they produce that new data. So that would have skewed it a bit too.
That's true. Thank you.
The Austin?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. That's interesting. Maybe it's something we'll pursue further through finance and ops, but thank you.
Hey, budget recap, planning 24,
Oh, no.
25.
Trustee Young.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Everything blends
Hi,
to yellow.
everybody. Just a little late to the meeting. Yeah, one of the other things that came up when I was talking to the Springwood PAC last year was our surprise at our score relative to other schools, and it looks like that's been kind of dealt with this year too, because we thought we were in better shape than the facilities
Then the
thing.
then the 2022.
Yeah, so
numbers.
it looks like it's more, to me, it made intuitive sense to me this year.
Okay.
Thanks.
But yes, absolutely
Trustee
more,
Young?
absolutely more on this in the finance and ops.
Recap.
Okay. So the amended budget, we didn't need a surplus to balance. Hooray. 23-24 funding recalc that we got in December allowed us to put a little bit aside for contingency, again, a buffer, recognizing that we always go in with the best of intentions, but obviously sometimes those pressures only come to bear in the middle of the year. So again, it's given us some buffer, some room, obviously. Enrollment projections, like I said, will be based on a no growth. So again, it'll be rollover in terms of the funding, sorry, the FTE numbers. And again, just recognizing that we got to keep sort of apprised of the cost pressures as articulated, the replacement and the benefit costs. The funding for the bargaining wage increases still need to be understood. Are they going to fully fund them all, i.e. and benefits also, remains to be seen. And then likewise, the local capital initiatives that we started making room for in the conversation last year, we'll continue that in the 24-25 year so that infrastructure, IT infrastructure and the White Fleet can continue on its replacement plan. Okay, survey went out at the beginning of February 1, the writ dropped as it were. And so same question as it was the last couple of years, because it seems to get to what we need to get to. 2 forms of questions for each of the areas of inquiry. What do you feel is going well related to student learning, learning resources, facility and transportation, parent and community partnerships, and truth and reconciliation? And then likewise the same areas in terms of what concerns do you want the board to consider related to the budget? And then a wrap-up question at the end is for free form, as it were. Is there anything else you'd like the board to consider related to the budget? So as of yesterday, we've heard from 96 respondents, 40 parents, 37 teachers, 13 support staff, 3 principals, and I think 1 community member. and a couple of students. I shouldn't negate them. The positive takeaway, I'll show you in a minute the actual themes that came across, but the positive takeaway for me in this whole of introducing the survey to the budget process is getting to individuals that wouldn't normally have a voice, or wouldn't normally take the opportunity to share their voice. And so again, my takeaway is 40 parents. And as much as I appreciate Deepak coming here, Angel and Carrie, it gives voice to some of the other parents that don't always come to our board meetings, don't always come to the budget meetings, and likewise teachers too, in terms of being able to hear from our teachers and our support staff in a different in a different venue. So I appreciate I appreciate the respondents that took the time to do the survey, as well as any more that certainly we'll keep the survey open until maybe mid-March as we go into the announcement. But point being, it's always, as Superintendent Jory indicates, it's always most responded to at the beginning of these things. The longer it's kept open, obviously they diminish in terms of how many come in. But point being, we'll keep it open, hoping that more people have some comments. So themes, and from a thematic, quality teachers, the appreciation for dedicated teachers and staff support. Superintendent Jory broke my silence earlier in an earlier meeting and told my secret. But again, I ran this through ChatGPT, and he expressed it very eloquently in terms of the rationale and why it works a little bit better than not my voice, but our voice sometimes when we look at data, because oftentimes I was sharing that I would look at these survey results, and you tend to focus on the wants, the needs, and that kind of stuff, the concerns, as it were. And this was able to formulate it in a manner that obviously showed the appreciative side, as well as obviously the concerns. And so this is what you're kind of seeing it in that context. Quality teachers, appreciated for the dedicated teachers, support staff, leadership appreciation, same thing, recognition of the effective school leadership. And just for clarity, I'm going to read this out, and then obviously if there's any commentary and comment, I will open it up at that point. Indigenous resources, calls for more resources and supports for Indigenous education. Again, a theme of student engagement, more emphasis on engaging students and adapting teaching methods to diverse learning styles. Food program obviously continues to be recognized as a need and a want. So food support, food programs and support, recognition of programs addressing food insecurity and mental health support. And again, and it's not just on the part of the Feeding Futures Fund. There was a food element to the Student Family Affordability Fund last year, but certainly traditionally we've always known that there's an element of food in our schools. So we've often used community links to address that area, and so that perpetuates. Technology integration, again, technology is always a wonder on the part of staff, parents, and students. Acknowledgement of sufficient technological resources. Literacy focus, and again, coming back to the strategic planning, literacy and numeracy. So suggestions of greater focus on literacy, individualized support, recognition of efforts to meet individual student needs, the one-on-ones, and just generally speaking, the challenges that are being expressed, concerns about behavioral issues and the impact on the academic performance, social emotional learning, and again, this even preceded COVID, we've heard this theme expressed, and it continues on today. Emphasis on emotional well-being and learning through play. Parent and community supports, gratitude for community, and inclusive policies, particularly in the LGBTQ2+ students. Safe environment, again, dovetailing with the previous theme, importance of creating safe and positive learning environments. And I would even take this one step further to our staff also, not just for students and teachers, but or it's not just for students, but for our staff too, our support staff and our teaching staff that are sometimes not feeling safe. Facilities and maintenance, and again, appreciative of the efforts to consolidate old non-school sites, as well as the response to work orders. Kudos, obviously, there were several kudos, obviously, to the maintenance and operations staff for being, to addressing that, including the managers for delivering on those sorts of things. So I'll stop. I'm going to take it off share for a moment so that we can, well, I guess you won't be able to see it if I take it off share.
I don't see any,
Dilemmas.
don't see any hands at this point.
Okay.
And no questions in the chat. So
Without further ado.
to a little wind up, and then we meet again after the announcement in March 15th, to give us a hard ground floor, bottom floor, whatever way you want to call the floor, and our future discussions thereafter. Final comments, Mr. Amos.
Yeah, so you can see the next steps. We'll take a pause before we hear the funding announcement. We'll continue to obviously have dialogue amongst ourselves, the board and senior leaders. And obviously we'll continue to take the survey results, add that to the conversation, but recognize that it won't be anything until we know the funding announcement in March. We go for spring break. We'll come back with a vengeance, as it were, in April, reporting back, obviously, any of the messages coming from the ministry. And for what it's worth, obviously and I always sort of highlight this, the throne speech happens, I think, in 2 weeks' time. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's followed a week later by the budget announcement. Again, the minister, again, you think about it, the government is taking its orders from our quasi monarchy. And then a week later, the government now has the mandate, or at least confirmed mandate, obviously, of their priorities, which sets the budget priorities. And then about 3 weeks later, when those priorities are articulated to the ministries get their funding envelope, the term is, which is what percolates against our projections to form the funding announcement in mid-April. Sorry, mid-March. So again, knowing that that's all going to happen in the next series of weeks, we will sit tight until that is done, and then we'll reconvene, obviously, in April with our our partners groups, special public board meeting, and if the appetite is there to approve the budget in April. If not then at least by the end of June. I'm taking it off screen.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Amos. I had Elaine, Trustee Elena Young up once, and she came down, and Trustee Austin got in, and then now Trustee Young's back up again. So Trustee Young, we'll go with you because you went up first before.
Okay, I don't know quite why my hand went down. Maybe I touched it or something. Okay. But anyway, just something that Trustee Austin was kind of threw out at one of these other meetings. As you know, we've been through a few of them, about a hybrid meeting for the public meeting in April. And I know that Parksville Council has been using the forum in a hybrid setting. And I just wonder if there's any will on the part of us to consider that.
We'll put it in the hopper. Yeah, we'll put it in the hopper and have a think. Yeah, we've got a few weeks to mull that over.
Yeah, you've got a board meeting this month. You can always chat about it there.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Amos. Trustee Austin.
Thank you, Ron. Again, it's a great presentation. It's the third time I've heard it in 2 days, and each time I've gleaned something new or new question or more information. So that's great. But that leads me to think, wow, it's overwhelming in a way for people that are hearing it for the first time. So it's great that it's going up on the website so that people can download it and look at it and muse over it and scratch their head over it. And I'm wondering, what do you think would be the best process, considering there isn't really like a public meeting until the April, you just had it up there, the April 16th or something. The one I think Elaine was just talking about, perhaps could be hybrid. But if people had questions before that, what would be the best way for them to ask those questions? Would it be through their partner, through their, whatever their organization is, or get a hold of you directly, or what?
I'm not opposed to getting hold of us directly. Again, we're open for business. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're always happy to answer questions that come up. Our emails are pretty
there.
out there.
Public.
What's the word? Yeah, pretty
Public.
public. So absolutely, pick up a phone, email, text. Anyways, yes. And I'm kind of speaking for myself, but I'm sure I'm speaking for the other senior leaders. We're always open to chat.
That's great. Okay, thanks, Ron.
Hey, Ron's had an hour and a half of his poor vocal cords doing this again today. This is the one time a year that we stretch ourselves into a very long one-time presentation by the Secretary Treasurer, but we know he's always succinct, to the point, and always is able to put these concepts and this dilemma of how to balance a budget into context and perspective for us in a very usable, language-friendly way, and I appreciate that extensively, as Trustee Austin has also said. It's always got a little tidbit of something new, and that's always very informative. I don't see any further hands from folks, and I don't see anything in the chat, and we've got a big love heart from Angel straight to Mr. Amos. Thank you very much, everyone.
You're making me blush. And yesterday was Valentine's Day.
Yeah, we're right here. Thanks everyone for joining us. And as Mr. Amos has said, please feel free to reach out to any of us, really, as trustees and district staff, to answer questions if you have them. Thanks everyone. Have a pleasant evening. Hockey game's on.